The Bible Study Podcast, episode 418. Today, the Bible Study Podcast continues the study with the Gospel of Matthew in chapter 6. Welcome to the Bible Study Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. I've been thinking about fasting. And fasting is something that I usually don't get much further than thinking about, but it is going to be the first thing that we learn about today in the Gospel of Matthew. And it starts like this. When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. The first question that you have to ask when you look at verses on fasting is, why would someone fast? Why do we fast? Jesus is asked why his disciples don't fast at one point, and says that you don't fast when the bridegroom is there, that basically as long as he is there, the disciples won't fast, but they'll fast sometime later on. And it's certainly a practice that Christians have done for years, some more than others. Certainly it was very strong within the monastic tradition, but I know people who fast today. And I have fasted occasionally, and honestly, I'm pretty bad at it. And I say bad at it. One of my problems is I may disfigure my face just because I get a headache and I start to get lightheaded, and so it's difficult to fast on a day that I'm trying to do something. And my other problem is I just have no willpower. At least that's how I think of myself. Now, in the last couple of years, I've gotten to the point where I have a regular devotion, I have a regular prayers, and this year I've been walking fairly faithfully 10,000 steps a day, and yet I still consider myself as somebody who has poor willpower, and part of that is because I wake up in the morning and decide at 7 o'clock that I'm going to fast, and by 8 or 9 o'clock that seems like a poor idea. Or I decide I'm going to diet or whatever. But there's a difference between dieting and fasting. The reason why we fast, as is implied in these verses, is almost as an offering to God. It's something that we are depriving ourselves of something that we have, food, and that we need, to focus on something else, to enhance our prayers. And you may recall the time when Jesus comes down from the Mount of Transfiguration, and the disciples have been unable to cast out a demon, and Jesus says, this demon can only be cast out with fasting and prayer. And that it puts a level of seriousness behind our prayers, and that is why some people really recommend fasting in a spiritual sense, and not fasting to lose weight, but fasting to focus in on what is important. And what Jesus says is when you fast like the Pharisees are doing, where you're really just fasting to show how religious you are, and you're showing to everybody that you are religious and that you are very religious because you're willing to fast, that you aren't focusing in on what's important, that is your whole reward, how people think about you, instead of getting closer to God through the act of fasting, getting closer to God through an obedience, getting closer to God by the discipline that is fasting. And so that goes on into the next topic, which is, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. It would appear to be three separate thoughts there, and yet my Bible lumps those all in the same thought, treasures in heaven. So let's see if we can understand what they're talking about. Let's see if we can understand what Jesus is talking about here. The first one, I think, is the one that is most familiar. I think of the movie The Man for All Seasons, where somebody is convinced to give false testimony and is given an office in the government because of his false testimony, and the person looks at the badge of office and says, "What profits a man if he gains the whole world but gives up his soul? But for whales?" And Jesus is saying there is our relationship with God, and there's everything else. What do we hold in highest value? The problem with fasting ahead of this was you're holding in higher value what people think of you than you are what God thinks of you. Our treasure doesn't have to be money. Our treasure doesn't have to be gold and riches, or even mutual funds, stocks and bonds, or real estate. But it is just what is the thing that we hold most dear. What is the thing that we will cling to while we give up on something else? And is therefore our treasure in heaven? Is our treasure what God thinks of us? Is our treasure in obedience to God, which cannot be taken away? Or is it down here where moth and vermin destroy, or moth and rust in other accounts? I think of situations where we've lost something, and it has been something pricey. I think of the time that my daughter totaled the car that we had bought for them. While I was tempted to be angry, my most important thing in that case was, are you okay? Because she is irreplaceable. The car is not. When our house was broken into, there are things that I treasure that we have here, but not as much as the people who make this a home. So Jesus says, what is it that you treasure, and how much at risk is that? There was the year that I was a paper millionaire, a paper multimillionaire even, and when I was working at a .com. And the next year, the .com bubble burst, and all that paper wealth went away. Now, some of it wasn't really paper wealth in the sense that I actually got to the point I could have sold and made a couple $1 million, and didn't, chose not to. It was a poor choice. But the next year I had to look at where I was and say, but I'm married, I have kids, I have God, things are good. I'm just short a couple $1 million. And I considered myself fortunate. I considered myself blessed. Because I wouldn't have traded that $2 million for any of the rest of that. Where is your treasure? And then Jesus talks about the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. That's interesting. Now, let's ignore, for instance, that some people are blind. What is he trying to get at here? If your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. One of the things that I think about here, and this is not necessarily where Jesus was going with that, but what am I putting into my eyes? I think of our opportunity in this day and age with all the media that we consume. Where are we focusing these eyes that we have that take in so much? Where are we focusing our ears, for that matter? He says, if your eyes are unhealthy, your body will be full of darkness. How much time do we spend looking at the light? How much time do we spend taking in that which is wholesome, that which is healthy, that which is good for us? And how much time do we spend taking in that which is not? Because no one can serve two masters. We have to decide who we will serve. Among the things we cannot serve and serve God at the same time, getting back to that first thought of where our treasures is, we cannot serve money. Money can be useful. Money can be valuable, certainly. Money can be darn right handy. But it can't be our master if God is our master. It can be a tool in our hand that we can use to serve God, but it has to be less important than Him. it has to be less important than the people he puts in our lives. One of the things I like about making money is I take great joy in the opportunities to be generous. I take great joy in being able to take the money and the things that God has given me and use them in His service. I pray that with all that God has blessed you, you will be a blessing to others. And that you and I this week will put God first and serve Him only. With that, we'll end this episode of the Bible Study Podcast. If you have any questions, send an email to host@thebiblestudypodcast.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at thebiblestudypodcast.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at Chris2X. And as always, thanks so much for listening.
Everyone wants to change the world. Capital Ministries is doing just that, one heart at a time, by creating disciples of Jesus Christ among political leaders in the U.S. and foreign nations. For more than 25 years, founder Ralph Drollinger has written Bible studies specifically for public servants. Study along with us and learn what the Bible says about capitalism, communism, abortion, same-sex marriage, and other contemporary issues. Subscribe and follow us at lifeaudio.com or search Capital Ministries on your favorite podcast platform.